Well, hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Zwift Coaching Podcast. I'm Matt Rowe, here with Greg Henderson. How are you doing, Greg?
Hey, mate. How are you? I'm good. And Kev, how are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Greg. And how you going, Matt?
Yep, top man. Good to have you both here. And so today's topic for the podcast is training camps. So to kick off, guys, I think a little word association. So if someone says the word training camp, what is the first word that kind of comes into each of your heads?
Fatigue.
Yeah. Typically, it's overreaching, or it's definitely a fatigue state.
Fatigue. All right, good one. I'm going to say gains, because after all the fatigue, we're going to gain. So, all right, good one. So, training camps then, guys. What kind of makes a good training camp in your guys' mind?
For me, typically it's a dramatic increase in your training volume. You know, you've got just time and energy to put 100% into riding your bike, nutrition and recovery. And you know, there's three states that you can arrive into a training camp. You can arrive into a training camp recovered, and you're not going to get those adaptions because you're not stressing the body, so you're not going to get those adaptions. You can come in and overreach and leave the camp in a fatigued state, in which then once you recover, you'll get, you know, what you said, Rowie, you'll get those massive gains. And then there's the one you've got to be really careful of is overtrained, is where you come in a little tired, you up your percentage of training, you know, and you can put a massive amount of volume in these training camps, and then you don't have the adequate recovery after these training camps, and then you dig yourself in this hole, this overtraining hole, and you think, why am I going worse? And you start. So what actually typically as an athlete starts to happen is you train more. You think, I must just need a bit more training, a bit more, and you start digging a deeper hole and a deeper hole. So there's three states that you can arrive in, and I think you need to arrive reasonably, not super fresh, but you need to be able to be overreached during a training camp.
Yeah, that's a good point, because although we want to, you obviously want to stress your body more than a regular week. I think there's a kind of fine line between stressing just enough to eke out those adaptions and doing too much and getting sick as you like. And I think there's a tendency, especially for amateurs, to think, this is my big training camp of the year. Maybe it's a week long, and maybe it's overseas. Tendency to go into it and just day one, just hit it really hard, dig yourself a hole, and by day three, you're on your knees. And I think that's where kind of some proper structure into a training camp really pays dividend, as opposed to just hitting it hard and just trying to, with that kind of whole ego thing takes over, where you just try and smash it every day with your mates. I think structure for me is absolutely key in a training camp.
Yeah, and for me, Matt, it really stands out as it's a period of time for the athlete where they're really focused and concentrated on their training for whether it be a short period of time or a long training camp, where they're there to do everything right. They're going to train correctly, nutrition's going to be perfect, recovery's going to be perfect, they're going to be doing all their off the bike strength work and core work. So it really is a focused period of time. And I've quite often spoken to professional athletes about training camps, and for them it really is about they're investing their time, so they want to make the most out of it. They want the most return for their investment, and they're taken away from their home environment, whether it be from their family or they're living with girlfriends or mates or whatever. They're doing a different location, and so for them mentally, they switch on. Obviously, they train well at home, but when they go to a training camp, it's like, game on. I'm here to make some good gains here. Let's do everything right and come out of it with the best possible fitness that we can get.
Yeah, good points there. Just going to home in on the location point. Because I was in my mind thinking, well, you can do a training camp at home without changing anything. And to me, kind of a training camp is a period of increased focus on your bike. So, off the bike, then you need kind of, put yourself in an environment where you can, I guess the outside of cycling stresses, work and family are reduced. But I was of the view, and feel free to critique me on this, but you can do a training camp for the amateur at home if you kind of manage the job. So perhaps you take a couple of extra days of work off in a week, and perhaps rather than having to mow the lawn, you get a gardener in or something, and perhaps rather than having to take the kids to gym class, your other half or the in-laws do it. And if you can minimize all these outside of cycling stresses, what do you think about for the amateur being able to do a training camp in your home city, in your hometown?
I don't know. I think it's possible what you said then, but I really think you need to be removed from your normal environment. So that way you're there to get a return on your time and your investment. I think if you're at home, there's probably too many distractions. You've got all your toys there, you've got all your electronics, everything's there. It's just hard to remove yourself from that. I think there's too many distractions in your own environment. So like I say, you go to a different location, you invest financially, you invest emotionally, and you want to get the most out of it. So you just tend to commit to the training a little bit more.
Oh, sorry, mate. Can you imagine telling your wife, I'm just going to have the week off, Dales? I'm just going to ride my bike. Don't know if that would go over too well.
Yeah, I know. And Matt, I heard you say, ask the in-laws to mow the lawn.
Yeah, ask the in-laws to mow the lawns. Excuse me, just while you're there, can you wash up the dishes as well?
I don't know what your relationship's like, Matt, but I'm not asking my in-laws to mow the lawns.
No, I wouldn't go that far. I think I might get the in-laws to look after the kids. Get a gardener in for the lawn maybe, but that'd be pushing it. It may not be the in-laws for long. Just staying on the topic of location, what kind of makes a good location for a training camp?
I used to love the alternating terrain. Obviously, it goes without saying, it has to be nice weather, consistent weather, so you can get outdoors for a long time, or consistently at a set time. But it just has to be a variation in terrain. You can't just be, unless you're training specifically for the Tour de France mountain stages or something like that, or a mountain Gran Fondo. You don't want to be just stuck in the mountains somewhere. You need the option of your recovery rides to be able to ride on the flat. I mean, we spoke about this in a previous podcast where even if you're just riding small gears, your torque is still really high through the cranks when you're going uphill. So that's like fatiguing the muscles. So you just need the flat sections where you can go and do, if you need to do some sprint training or some easy recovery rides, and you need some nice long mountains where you can do some long intervals, some threshold work, or just some beautiful long endurance rides.
Good stuff. And if you had to pick one location, each of you, for a training camp, where would you go?
For me, personally, I couldn't actually go past where I used to live. I used to live in Girona in Spain, and it had everything there for me. It was, and that's why I lived there for 12 years. It was fantastic.
Yeah, well, I was going to say Lake Tahoe in America. That was a fantastic location. You mentioned Girona and obviously Andorra with that one there, Greg, but in Lake Tahoe, you get a 100k loop, which can be considered almost flat, whereas in the Pyrenees, like you say, you're always climbing or descending. So for me, Lake Tahoe, good weather, good roads, and good terrain as well. And
great options. Never been to Lake Tahoe myself, but I'll have to try give it a go. But for me, I like Mallorca. I guess it's long been a destination for Brits, especially to go for training. But you've got a great mix of hilly terrain and flat rolling roads. The weather is generally good, especially if you go in kind of March, April onwards. Great location for me. But anyone with any other shouts, if you fancy tweeting us, let us know where your favourite location is for a training camp. One other point you mentioned, Kev, was about on a training camp was about nutrition. So if we're all agreeing here, training camp, you're going to increase your training load. If you don't get your nutrition dialed, you are going to be your tank's going to be empty. So how again, some people go on a training camp to get fitter, get stronger, but also kind of shed that weight. So it's a fine balance between increasing your form physically, becoming stronger, and also kind of managing that weight. Obviously, we've got a podcast that focuses purely on nutrition. Asker, you can drop the special, so you'll find that in the library. Just to touching on a few principles that you guys would advocate for nutrition on a training camp specifically.
Yeah, I might jump in there with that one. But this also leads to another question in regards to how training camps have changed over the years. So with the training camps that I've been running this year, and this is with professional riders, we're now doing double sessions on training camps, and that comes back to nutrition as well. So we're doing like a morning road session, an endurance session, and we're doing that in a recover low state. So in the last half of a training ride, so if it was a 4-hour road ride, the last 2 hours we're doing no carbohydrates, and then we recover low, so no carbs at lunch either. And then in the afternoon, we're doing an afternoon Zwift session, and that is done in a fasted state as well with no carbs. And then after the Zwift session, it's then carbs for dinner and back to normal diet. So that sort of brings into play the type of training, but also the way we dial in nutrition to suit that training as well, and also the adaptation. So kind of leads to a bigger question as to how we run training camps these days. So Greg, you're probably a good example of how you've seen training camps change over the years. I guess my perspective is that years ago you would go to a training camp, everyone would do the same training regardless if you were a classics rider or a GC rider. Everyone would just do kilometres. Would that be right?
Not so much when I was on, like, obviously on High Road and Sky. It was obviously, there was different groups that would set off and you know, people that were targeting Tour Down Under, people were targeting the classics, the tour riders. So that there were actually like 3 or 4 different groups that set off at different times and at different intensities. So they definitely take into account now, the pro teams, you know, what the actual targets are, because, you know, like we've discussed before, it's racing from day one now. You know, January, whatever, 16, whenever Tour Down Under starts, it's World Tour, it's go, it's points matters. So it's it's super structured. And your goals, you sit down, you have your meeting, and your goals are set out, and these are your races that you're targeting, and you know, you turn up on time and in good nick, and it's you know, your trainer, your nutritionalist, and it's your coach's job as well as your job. So you're a professional athlete.
Yeah, I guess the point I was alluding to is that I've seen probably in a different level of team where riders are going to a training camp and they're just getting in as many kilometres as they can, and people are too scared in some ways to put their hand up and say, I need a rest day today, I'm just fully cooked. You want to keep up with your teammates, you want to do as many kilometres as them, as much elevation. So, you know, where you could have taken a day off and then completed the camp in a good state, you put yourself in a hole. So it's just something to be aware of. If you are on a training camp with your teammates or your friends, it's okay to say, I need a rest day today, and then come back and hit the rest of the camp really good.
There's so many variables out there that can monitor that now, like heart rate variability and, you know, resting heart rate. You can measure those metrics so easily now that you don't have to be brave, and there's no bravado about it. You look on any training peaks or any sort of metric, and you can tell, okay, I actually do need a rest. It's not me being soft.
As an example to that, I had a training camp in Tenerife earlier in the year with 4 athletes, and there was one athlete into about day 4 clearly needed a rest day, and I said to that athlete, today you're going to stay home and have a complete day off the bike, and the other 3 went out riding, and the athlete was questioning, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do the same training as them? And it's not the point they can't do the same training as them. It's just that they're at a different level of fatigue, and the best thing for them is to have a rest day. And sure enough, they had their rest day. Rest of the training camp was completed very well, good response to the training, and they came out at the other end with good fitness. So it really just highlights the point that it is okay to have a rest day when it's needed.
Yeah, I think it's at the end of the day, it's all about you, isn't it? You go on a training camp to invest in you as an individual. And a couple of words you said a minute ago, Greg, you know, don't be soft. That's like a dagger to the heart. If someone says to you, you're being soft, or don't be soft, you know, a group of mates, if you're not a professional, it's easy to kind of lack that discipline and just get roped in, suckered in, just to doing that bit extra. And you get away with it for a day. You might get away with it for 2 days. But by the 3rd day of your camp, maybe 4th day of your camp, you're halfway. You're gonna be on your knees, and you're just gonna throw the whole camp away. And if you're used to doing maybe 8 hours a week, 10 hours a week as an amateur in and around work, you can probably double those hours in a training camp environment where you haven't got all those extra stresses. But if you're trying to double those hours with a massive increase in intensity and trying to ride hard up every hill and do, just basically your TSS would just go through the roof for a couple of days straight. Yeah, that's not sustainable. And coming back to the overreaching point you mentioned at the start, Greg, you're guaranteed to do that. So I think, the words, don't be soft. Let's not use those words. It's all well and good being a macho man, but you're gonna dig yourself in a hole and be the bigger rider, and make the smart decision. Take a rest day if you need it, and a couple of the metrics. You can use heart rate, as you mentioned, Greg. If you wake up in the morning, and you set out on your bike and your heart rate is just stuck low, you can't get your heart rate up, then that might be an indicator that you're a bit fatigued. But normally you can feel it in yourself. I mean, if you're walking down the stairs and your legs feel like they're full of concrete, you ain't going to perform too well on the bike that day. So perhaps consider knocking it back slightly, especially if you're in the middle of a training camp and you've got a good period to go. Just knock it back slightly.
Mate, that was every day for me as a tour rider.
Every day.
Every day my legs felt like concrete.
And what do? Just carry on.
You don't have a choice, do you?
Don't have a choice, yeah. Yeah.
The key for these training camps is, like we said, you definitely overreach. Like that is the goal, to temporarily overreach, but where you actually then get the gains is to make sure that you get adequate recovery after the training camp, because you can whack in such a load in these training camps when all you're focused on is riding your bike, and they typically say 2 to 3 times the amount of recovery to the days that you rode your bike. That's how much recovery you should take. And by recovery, we don't obviously mean day off the bike, but say if it's a 4-day training camp, you should have 8 days nice and easy riding, because you're going to load yourself full of 4 days of training.
Yeah, but Greg, you mentioned the overreaching, but I would also say a training camp is about placing your body under different stresses to what you normally can in your home environment. So when you're in your home environment, you're generally only going to be able to train with intensity or increased duration. But when you go to a training camp, you can include things like the carbohydrate restriction, the train lows, the recover lows, and so on. You can do ergo sessions, you can do double sessions. So there's so many other ways you can stress your body to force adaptation on a training camp. So I think about training camps as ways to stress the body. And an example of that was at a training camp. I mentioned Lake Tahoe before. We're up there with a professional team. I had my riders within that team that were training with me, and then there was the other team members. They were GC guys. Every day they were going out doing kilometres, just full volume, nothing else. My guys, we were doing morning road sessions, as I mentioned before, the recover low, ergos. We're going from the ergo into a hot bath, and then gym sessions as well. And what we found after that was the guys that were throwing more stress at the body, they came out of that in a much better state than the guys that were just doing volume. Like, there's obviously gains to be made by volume, but we're finding now that when we go to training camps, it's not just about doing long rides, it's about placing your body under stress in as many ways as you can.
As many different stresses as possible. We just learnt that exactly same thing in advanced exercise physiology. My professor was telling me this exact same thing. Go to altitude, heat stress, training is a stress, and then you can put yourself under caloric stress. There's for an elite athlete, the amount of different stresses that you can put your body under is what will actually give you the biggest gains in mitochondrial density. It was a really interesting lecture.
Yeah, exactly. You've just hit the nail on the head there, and that's what we're doing in training camps now. So I'm a really big proponent now of training camps, particularly altitude. I actually would put more faith and effort into double sessions over and ergo sessions over altitude. Fair enough, we go to altitude for training, but we're getting a bigger response to the double sessions and the ergo sessions. And as you know, Greg, with altitude, not everybody responds to that, and it's hard to gauge the response to fatigue with it, who's going to respond to it, when they're going to respond to it, when they're going to come out of it with their good form. But we know that with the heat that comes with the ergo sessions, everyone responds to that. And to do that at altitude, we're getting even more gains out of it. So it certainly is a new way of thinking about training camps.
And these split days we're talking about, if you've got an ergo or a turbo setup, one way, perfect, and we can jump on Zwift. Alternatively, you can just jump out on the road twice. So you go out in the morning for your steady ride, and for you amateurs, it may be 2 hours, maybe a little coffee stop at the end of it. Get back and then have a break, maybe 3-4 hour break, and then get out and do your second session. What about in terms of duration or kind of time gap between morning and afternoon session? Is there kind of a minimum time you'd recommend, guys? I mentioned 3 or 4 hours there. I think 3 hours would be the absolute minimum for me. What would you advocate in an ideal world?
Yeah, definitely minimum 3 hours. You got it right there by saying 3 to 4 hours. By the time you get up, say you roll out at 9, you do a 4 hour ride, you're back at 1, a few hours off, and you're back on the ergo at 5 in the afternoon. So it makes for a long day, but as we said, you're on a training camp. It's a concentrated effort. Are you doing everything right? So you can handle those double training days on a training camp.
And bear in mind that the ergo session's super concentrated. It's not a 3 hour ergo session. It can be over and done within an hour 15. So it's as long as you've got that 3-4 hours rest, you can hit it any time. Yep.
And have you got a session, Greg, that followers can have a go at?
Yeah, I have. I've made one up that's pretended that we've actually just completed a training camp, and it's a race simulation. So it's got a bit of a mixture of everything. So it's just sort of to pretend that we've done a nice training camp. We've touched on sort of every sort of physiological and cardiovascular system, and then the actual training session will touch on every single cardiovascular system that we have, and it'll let you know how you're going.
All right, so that session is going to be attached to this podcast, so you can give that a go. We've kind of touched upon it briefly. I think we just want to kind of round it off really. Talk about recovery. So we're talking about recovering after the training camp, but also during the training camp. Obviously, this training camp environment is conducive to having extra recovery time. So when we're off work as an amateur, now we're off work as a pro. You've got extra time as well. It gives you an opportunity to have a nap in the middle of the day to help with that recovery. So perhaps while the in-laws are mowing the lawn, you can be in bed resting up and just chilling out really.
Love a nap.
Yeah. What about massage as well? I think because a massage for me is it helps mentally relax. Do you think massage is a good idea?
Oh, for sure. I mean, just go back to naps first. I mean, there's actually a scientific reasoning behind the naps. It's a nice spike of human growth hormone. So it's a massive release of one of your biggest hormones that helps you recover. So a nap's really important so that you can start your second session. Or if you're not doing second, even a nap after training is so good for recovery. Yep. But massage again, yeah, of course, it's going to flush all those toxins out. It's going to loosen the muscles up, make them a bit more supple for the next day, and then let you just. And it's all about putting the mindset. You're on training camp, right? Let's do everything 100%. Massage, recovery, sleep, eat, train, repeat. It's like if there's no outside influences, I'm here to do the best I have. I've got this amount of time, from this day to this day. Let's do everything perfect. And if you have that option, then it's nothing but a benefit.
Yeah, I think if you're not used to having a massage, the key being make sure you don't have too deep a massage, too hard a massage, because that's going to ruin your legs. A nice light flush, that's what you want, guys. And on the topic of recovering, post ride on training camp, get yourself sorted ASAP. So don't just lie on the sofa in your kit or sit at the bar in the hotel. Get showered, changed, have a little chill, and start that recovery process going. Get out of your kit, because you're going to spend enough time in your shorts, enough chamois time. You don't need to spend time sat on the sofa or lying on your bed in sweaty kit. So get changed as quick as possible. As tempting as it is to have a pint at the bar.
I guess that's a good point to raise there too, Matt, because if you're at a training camp, you're with your mates, away from the home environment, it's easy to sit around at night time, telling yarns, having a few drinks, and all of a sudden it's late into the night. So just be aware of, like you said, recovery and sleep for sure plays a big part.
And just going to touch then on a training camp that I've seen being done on Zwift. So the UK-based Canyon Eisenberg team done a Tour of Britain training camp on Zwift, obviously in the run-up to the Tour of Britain, which was 3 days of specific efforts on Zwift, coupled with some steady rides in the morning. So going back to the split days you mentioned, Kev, and I think I looked it up what they did. On day 1, they'd done attacking the breakaway. Day 2 was a repeat attacking session, and day 3 was a group ride with a 15-minute race on the end of it. And although to many, you may look at this and thinking it's kind of, a bit of a PR stunt, but actually this is the way these guys train. I know, again, one of our coaches at Rowan King works for the Canyon Eisenberg team, and this is how a lot of these guys train week in, week out, is by split days, as we mentioned, and using Zwift. And I know, Kev, you've put a couple of posts on Instagram, and you're a big user of Erg and Zwift on training camps.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said before, we've experimented with our training camps and what the rides get out of it, and now I'm fully of the belief that the double sessions and the riders' feedback as well cements this as well, that the gains they're making, the changes to the blood, like for example, one of the guys just went to the Vuelta and had some of his best blood values that he's recorded over the years leading into a Grand Tour. And that was from doing double sessions, the hot bars after the ergo, things like that. So for me, going forward, I wouldn't run a training camp that is just based on purely volume or elevation gain. For me, it's double session days with recovery days as well, and with the fuel strategies as well. And the hot bath we're adding to it as well. And I've mentioned the hot bath a few times now, but I just want to emphasize that hot baths and training on the ergo in the heat aren't just about acclimatizing to hot weather. It's about the changes that occur to the blood. It's about the changes that occur to thermoregulation and the gains that you make in that. So, there used to be the thinking that the increased core body temperature and the hot bath was all about when you're going to go racing Qatar or somewhere really hot and humid. But the gains we're making in terms of increased blood plasma, increased hematocrit, just from doing the double sessions, the ergos, the hot baths, it's huge, and it definitely is the way forward. And we can probably mention now too, Matt, that we're going to implement these strategies in a Zwift training camp, aren't we?
Absolutely. An IRL in real life Zwift training camp. That's obviously a mixture of these split days that we mentioned. So yeah, keep an eye out for that on Zwift social media platforms. There's going to be more details about how you can potentially get involved. But it's going to be really exciting at the start of December.
Yeah, well, the key point is that Zwift isn't just about for training indoors. It's to improve your outdoor riding experience as well. And we want to let the general public experience the philosophy from training camps that we're putting in place now with professional riders. And we're going to bring all these methods to a real life training camp for Zwifters.
Absolutely. And the split days that Kev, your World Tour guys, are doing, and to prepare for the Vuelta, all those principles are going to be taken and distilled and applied for amateurs. So that kind of world-class training. It's not just world-class training applied to the pros. This is world-class training applied to anyone in the world. As long as you've got Zwift, and you've got a mentally strong head, I guess, because obviously this stuff is training hard hurts.
That's going to be happening early December, and just like I always say, misery loves company. So let's all get on board, and we'll all have a great time.
Yeah, let's get those gains going. It's all gain together.
Absolutely.
Just make sure you book the in-laws in. Make sure they've got the lawn covered back home.
Got the lawns mowed.
Well, guys, anything else to add on training camps there? I know we could talk all day on it, but anything else for this podcast?
No, just like I said, I just want to touch on just quickly. Just make sure once you have done the training camp, recovery is important. I can't stress it enough because you can actually do 50 to 100% more training volume than what you would normally do. It's vitally important that you take adequate rest, recovery, active recovery after the training camp, and that's when you'll actually find, it may be 6 days, 5 days after the camp that you start absolutely flying. So just don't be afraid to take those rest days after you've done that really, really specific training camp.
Yeah, and the danger there, of course, is as a working guy, you come back off training camp where you've had all the time in the world, boom, straight back to work. Monday morning, you're back in work. So it may not be that physical stress of riding a bike, but don't underestimate, as we always say on almost every podcast, don't underestimate that stress of everyday life. So you got from that, perfect training environment where you're riding your bike, no other cares in the world, to back to that kind of whirlwind tornado of life. And so be really careful, as Greg says, just to manage that fatigue on and off the bike.
Yeah, and for me, the key points are that training camps are for everyone, not just professionals. Everyone's going to make gains from them. A training camp can be anywhere from 3 days over a long weekend up to 3 weeks if you have the time. So whatever time you have available to invest in a training camp, as we said, go to that training camp with the strategy that you're going to do everything right, everything put in place correctly, and make the most gains that you can, and put your body under the most stress that you can, different stresses as well, not just volume and duration.
And obviously with a group of like-minded people, I always think it's more enjoyable, and you're going to kind of create memories that last a lifetime. So there you go, guys. Get some friends together, book a training camp somewhere, go off to somewhere nice and sunny, and get some split days in. I think that wraps up our chat on training camps. We're going to move on now to cycling terminology. So, guys, have one of you got a terminology for me?
Yeah, mate. Matt, you've got 30 seconds to explain what throw it in the gutter means, starting from now.
Throw it in the gutter. Okay, doke. So you're riding along and you get the order from one of your teammates, throw it in the gutter. That is to ride in the gutter and get the whole group, whole line of riders behind you in the gutter. And likely you're doing it in a crosswind to try and break the group up. So when the wind's coming from the right, you stick everyone in the left-hand gutter. By default, that's where they end up riding. You're all trying to get a little bit of shelter, and they're stuck in the gutter. That's a horrible place to be as a rider, and it hurts. And when you look up ahead,
I think that's time, Matt.
Dong.
Oh,
good explanation.
So, Greg, quick question for you. In relation to putting it in the gutter, were you the hammer or the nail in that instance?
To be honest, to be fair, I was never ever the strongest, but I could always find myself in the right position, and I think that had something to do with either my track skills or my sprinting skills in a bunch positioning. So I've never ever claimed to be like the guy that would absolutely tear a bunch to pieces, but I would always find myself in the front group just because of positioning.
That's a good point. It's funny how sprinters are so good at hiding in a bunch. They're just so wary of putting their nose in the wind, aren't they?
And just seem to find the front. It's just something we have innate. And I think if you take it another step further, I think track riders, if you came from a track background, you could always find that too. You always could see things about to happen before they did, or you could slip through a gap that wasn't supposed to be there, or just I think that was definitely one of my attributes.
Good attribute to have. So comparing yourself to an engine whose job is get on the front and just produce that power. I guess as a sprinter, your job, you got to save every watt of energy. You got to be really smart with it, because obviously you're gonna need all that energy and all that power at the end. So,
mate, when you haven't got many watts, you got to save them all.
Yeah. All right. Quick fire question coming up. So quick fire question is: shave your legs to your short line or the whole of leg?
Are you kidding me?
Go on.
I would do the whole leg. The people actually just shave it to the short line.
Yeah, I'm a whole leg person. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a whole leg person as well. Actually, I was going to hope one of you was going to say short line. So this is a question. I come up with this question. Is something a chat I had with a few friends recently, and saw a guy with like a really hairy top third of his squad. I was like, mate, what's going on? And joking around, let's ask him whether his razor broke. And he's saying, "Oh, what's the point? Or why would you shave the rest of it?" I was like, "Because when you're naked, you look really weird."
Actually, do you know what? I tell you what. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this is no kidding. Adam Hansen, no kidding. He shaves to the because he's got really fine hair, he shaves to his short line. I just remembered that.
So it
So
does
there's
happen.
a pro that actually only shaves to the short line. It's Adam Hansen. I just remembered that now because he's got really, really fine hair, and you couldn't even tell he hadn't shaved for 2 weeks on his legs. But when he shaves his legs, it's to the short line.
There you go.
Not unheard of.
And what about the sock line? I've never seen anyone not shave below the sock line. That would be even weirder. Surely nobody does that.
I've seen
Below
that
sock
one.
line. Definitely below sock line. What about feet? Do you shave your feet?
No, I don't actually.
Don't shave the feet.
Make a note of that one. Doesn't shave feet.
Doesn't shave feet? You'd look funny in jandals, mate. You'd look really funny in jandals. You got nice shaved legs and a big hairy hobbit foot and a jandal.
I'll show you my foot next time I see you, Greg. Luckily, probably right actually. It is a big hobbit foot. Big twin. Yeah. Right. Okay, guys. Moving on to our Q&As. We got 4 questions that our listeners have sent in. First question is from Jake Seddon that was sent in via Twitter, and the question reads: I can get away with about 8 hours bike riding a week. How should I split this time? My goal is to race criteriums next summer.
Big question.
Big question.
Big open-ended question. So, just kick that off then. So your goal is next summer. So you've got time to go through some phases. Building your base, some strength endurance, maybe some gym work. You're not looking to peak anytime soon. But for me, I'm going to take this question or interpret your question as, what should I be doing just before your race season starts? And for me, it definitely involves plenty of top-end work, kind of replicating the demands of cut racing. So lots of, you're trying to replicate, the demands of accelerating out of bends, spending short periods in zone 5, zone 6, those anaerobic zones where you're really chewing the stem and really going for it. But also you can't completely neglect your aerobic work, so your steady riding. So I've got a kind of a proposed week's worth of training that you kind of do just before you start your racing. It goes broadly along the lines of, on the weekend, get out and get steady riding, get a group ride in. That doesn't have to be ballistic. It can just be a kind of a steady ride. And in the week, then you're looking to get your top end intensity in. So maybe your local chain gang or a local group ride, which is basically a tear up, might be an hour and a half, and then probably three Zwift sessions with a focus on your top end power, some speed. They're basically real max effort sessions. So a Zwift race is absolutely perfect. So a Zwift session that focuses on maybe some capacity efforts, maybe even some sprints, a Zwift race, throwing those 3 alongside a local chain gang to help get that group riding skill element and a longer, steadier ride on the weekend. Within 8 hours, that's kind of ballpark what I'd be suggesting.
Boom. Absolutely. I wouldn't change a thing that you've said there, Rowie. I think that's just absolutely perfect. It's you've got 8 hours. It's roughly an hour a day or so. So yeah, I would, and you've got to chuck some recovery in there. I would not disagree with a single word you said there.
Yeah, I would just add to that by going back and assuming that we're talking about the current time. So I'm assuming in autumn. And my key point would be that we need to have intensity in our training season long, even in our pre-season training. So whether that just be one intensity session a week or twice a week during your base training, still include intensity. So if you are in your early part of training leading into next summer and you're doing your base training now, I'll be looking to including 1 or 2 sessions with just a little bit of intensity in those weeks.
Great. There we go. Question number 2 is from Sarah Knowles that was sent in via Twitter. So thank you, Sarah. The question reads: I get pins and needles in my hands when I do long rides and sometimes in my toes too, but the main discomfort comes in my hands. Is this normal and what can I do about it?
Yeah, well, I used to get the same thing as a pro all the time, and I put up with it and I would always, the way I got around it was just changing hand position quite regularly. But I knew what it was from. It was from my aggressive position that I was riding. I had, my handlebars down low. I had a lot of had a long reach, like a really long stem, so I was actually in an aerodynamic position for most of the day. So basically the take home point would be maybe release the handlebars, as in like raise them, turn the hooks of your handlebars up a little bit, just take the pressure points off, and you can do that by lifting your handlebar height and release those pressure points just that little bit. If you're not prepared to change your position, then just keep changing your hand position. Go from your hooks to your tops of your bars to your drops, and just keep changing and switching around, because like I said, I had the same thing for 10 years, but it was just because I knew that was the reason why of my aggressive racing position.
Yeah, so it sounds like in this case, like you mentioned there, Greg, that the weight distribution is not quite equal, and there's more weight forward on the bike on the hands, and it's taking most of the pressure. So as you mentioned, if you can change your position, bring the handlebars up, maybe even a shorter stem, and the saddle back a little bit, that should bring some of the weight distribution back to the saddle and to the pedals as well, and that might help with the pins and needles in the hands.
Absolutely.
Definitely all good advice there. And I think sometimes it's referred pain, so it may be a case if you've got your glutes are tight or your back muscles are tight, and sometimes a bit of a massage can just help loosen that up. And just try and relax, as you said, Greg. Just relax your hand position, hand grip, on the handlebars. Now you look at some riders, and especially when they're going downhill and when they're panicking and a little bit scared, maybe you're holding onto the bars so tight, like you're on a big roller coaster at Disneyland, and that just tenses your whole body up. And it's really important for your bike riding to loosen up, and a relaxed bike rider will go downhill much more easily and in a more controlled and safer way. Plus, probably less pins and needles. So plenty of good advice there. Next question is from Jacob Fryer, that was sent in via Twitter, and Jacob's question goes: I am doing a charity ride, London to Paris, which is 4 days and about 6 hours of riding a day, and whilst there will be plenty of food and support, I'm conscious about eating too much or too little and the right and wrong foods. What can you advise?
I think the key thing here is not to change too much from what you used to.
Bang on.
That's where you can run into some problems, isn't it? It's they always say eat little and eat often, and the rule of thumb is 1 gram of carbohydrate per kg. But as long as you're eating and drinking regularly, not a heap at one time, but regularly and often, you're going to be you'll make it through. And yes, sometimes there are easier days than harder days, but as an overall calorie deficit, you'd never ever want to be in that calorie deficit, because that's when you can cause yourself some major grief. So just my advice, plain and simple, without going into any major detail, eat little but often, and if you can measure it out, it's about 1 gram of carbohydrate per kg of body weight.
Yeah, and I think as is mentioned in the question there, it's a charity ride, so I assume it's not going to be a high intensity ride, so the need for high carbohydrate intake during the ride should be reduced. So you're probably looking at between 40 and 60 grams of carbs per hour during the ride. My key point leading into that event would be to do the carbo load over 36 hours before the event, and that's where you consume between 7 and 10 grams per kilo of body weight for the 36 hours leading into the event. So if you're 70 kilos, it ends up being roughly 700 grams of carbs a day leading into the event. That way your stores are nice and high. And then just as Greg mentioned, I wouldn't make too many changes during the rides to what you've been doing in training. And also recovery will be important after that. So as soon as you finish each day, straight into the recovery drinks, a bit of protein, a bit of carbohydrates, and fuel up for the next day.
Yeah, all good advice. And obviously the one thing you both said there, stick to what you used to. Otherwise it's a case of disaster pants, isn't it? We've all heard about disaster pants, Greg. Just that the carbohydrate intake, just to give you a rough idea, energy bars, roughly 30 grams of carbs, a banana, roughly 25 grams of carbs, a small handful of apricots is about 20 grams of carbs, and an energy gel is about 20-22 grams of carbs. And my personal favourite, the honey and peanut butter wrap, is about 50 grams of carbs in there, so maybe better suited for a stop or an easy part of the ride. All right, next question is from Nigel Nerf, which was sent in via Facebook. It's quite a long question. I guess it comes in two parts. I'll read the whole question first, and I think we'll probably address it in two separate parts then. So Nigel's question reads, which would be the best prep for the World's Road Race in Innsbruck this year? The Vuelta, the Tour of Britain, or some big one-day hit-outs like Canada? Part A. Would the approach be the same for me? I'm targeting the UCI Gran Fondo World Champs next year and have options to do a huge training camp with the national squad, a cycling holiday with a family, or stay at home and do some local racing and Zwifting. So, first part of the question is best type of prep for the World's Road Race. What's your thoughts, guys?
Greg, you're the one experienced here.
Yeah, well, because training has just changed so much over the last even 5 years. It's Innsbruck is such a specific course. It's such a dynamic course. It's going to be decided on these specific laps, perhaps even decided on the very final climb. I would tend towards these races in Canada that have got these very short, sharp climbs that can do a lot of damage to the legs and put you way over threshold for a short amount of time and then recover, then way over threshold for a short amount of time and then recover. It could be such great training. And then I remember the old days. It used to be always the guys that were preparing for the World Champs. They would go and ride 2 weeks of the Volta España and then pull out, and then they would be, of course, your contenders at the World Championships. I mean, Paolo Bettini did that many times. And then, of course, you look at the guys racing the Vuelta right now. You've got the young Yates fella. He's in incredible form right now, and you think he must be a contender for the World Championships. Quintana, look how fast they're going uphill. But you have to remember, they're racing hard, super hard. They're emptying their reserves every single day for 3 weeks now. And then you take the likes of Richie Porte, who's riding, he's in the Volta España, but he's picking his days. He's just, one day was in the breakaway there, testing the legs. The next day he's in Gruppetto. The next day he climbs a little bit harder. So it all depends, like what your trainer, what you're confident in, what your trainer's confident in, what you've done before, what's worked in the past. And a lot of it with professional athletes is what they've done in the past, what's worked for them in the past. I know Tony Galopana, for example, a good friend of mine, he really believes in the racing. So he's racing the Vuelta right now, and he's got this set structure that he has before every single World Championships. 3 days out, he has to do a 7-hour ride. It doesn't matter whether it's rain, hail, or snow. He has to go out and do 7 hours 3 days before the World Championships. It's just got this ritual that he has. And I mean, if you look at his past results at the World Champs, I don't think he's been outside the top 10. So it really is a lot on what you believe is going to work for you, what your trainer believes is going to work for you, and how you want to go about it. It's a really interesting question, actually, and it'll be interesting to see where the winner comes from. Will it come from one of the guys that was up there contending? Because I'm not going to say necessarily the winner of those Canadian races will be the winner of the Worlds, because I think the parcours is a little harder, but just the fact that they were above and beyond threshold for so long and then under, like this Worlds course will be, I think it could be a really, really good training adaptation for them. So it's going to be really interesting to see.
Well, Greg, one key point there, the winner of the Canadian races isn't selected by his country, so he won't be winning that one.
There you go.
But actually, I've got a good example here, Greg, for you, and I've actually used some of your advice that we spoke about recently. So the question here is about which race should we use before the Worlds, and I've got a rider I'm preparing for the World Championships in the Elite Men, and he's just done Tour of Britain, and now he's back home training. And what we're doing is, when Zwift is available with Innsbruck course, he's jumping on there, and we're doing repeats of the major climb, and we're actually using your advice here, Greg. We're doing, this is on Zwift, 7 repeats of that climb, and we're going from fast to fastest on the 7th repeat. So up and down. It's a long ergo session. Come back to those double days we spoke about earlier. But to be able to ride the course on Zwift, and this is an example that pros are using Innsbruck on Zwift to prepare for the World Championships. And it's very little structure. It's just all based on feeling, where the first effort, go up there fast, U-turn at the top, come back down the bottom, go up the second time, go faster, U-turn, come back down, faster again, until the last one, the 7th effort, is just full gas, whatever you got left on Zwift. So that's another take on preparing for the Worlds.
Personally, I would like to, as I get, I think, an elder athlete myself, I used to need the racing. It didn't seem to matter what sort of interval training, what sort of ergos, because I used to always do ergos coming from a track background. I would prefer to race the Vuelta and then go and do the World Championships. Matt, what would you go with?
So for me, I think Tour of Britain, just because I think there'd be a tendency to perhaps overstretch yourself in the Vuelta. But ultimately, I guess it's so personal, and without having done the Vuelta and these big stage races myself, I guess I couldn't really comment personally. But I think you have to kind of manage it on an individual basis, and I think the danger would be going too deep and too far into the Vuelta. But I think the Tour of Britain lends itself to preparing for one-day events, just because of the real tough terrain basically, and the grippy road surface. I think people, when they race in the UK, they're always surprised, always comment on how grippy the road surface and how slow the road surface is, and you basically have to kind of fight for every kilometre an hour you travel. You have to fight for it. So I think
I agree.
Definitely points positives for using the Tour of Britain.
You need that unstructured intensity from racing. So as we spoke about, it's good to have some racing periods, whether it be the Vuelta or Tour of Britain, and you might pull out the Vuelta after 2 weeks, but you can train hard. But when you're in a race, that unstructured high intensity, that top end stuff is what you need for World Championships.
Bringing that question to Nigel as an individual, so he's preparing for the Gran Fondo World Champs next year. So we're just saying there, you need that unstructured training, basically the racing. So Nigel's asking, what would we recommend there? To do a huge training camp with his national squad, which is basically everyone else in his nation who are doing the Worlds, they're going to go away and do a training camp somewhere, a cycling holiday with the family, or stay at home, do some local racing and Zwifting. So as we've all agreed, racing is racing, and you can't really beat that. I guess there'd be a tendency to lean towards the stay home in your controlled environment, do some racing and Zwifting. And I guess the positive there for me is with the local racing as amateurs, chances are you don't get that much chance to practice those race skills and that race craft, and riding in a bunch. I think professionals take it for granted as being something you can just do. But if you're going to be traveling to the Gran Fondo World Champs, you're going to be in a huge peloton, and unless you're brave and you're kind of confident in a group, you're probably gonna suffer, because I think the courses tend to be quite tough. So positioning into these climbs is absolutely key. So I think for me, I'll probably be edging on the stay home and get in some local real racing, and also some top end specific stuff on Zwift.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. And I would look at the local racing and go into the races with a different goal in each one. So for example, you might go into one race where you're not concerned with the result, and you're just going to go there and try and hurt everyone as much as you can, attack repeatedly, do long turns, just give yourself the hardest race that you can. And then on other races, you might go there and try and be as efficient as you can and try and hide in the bunch as much as you can, and not hit the front and stay in the front of the race that way. So practice your racecraft, as you just spoke about then, Matt.
There is the option also of, depending on when that training camp finishes, because we just spoke about how dedicated and focused and committed to the task at hand you are when you're at a training camp. If you could go to that national training camp, train like a monk, and if he comes back and if he's got 2 or 3 weeks still to the World Championships, you still have time to actually put in a week of racing, racecraft, all those adaptions that you need to stimulate the body to race. So maybe there's the option of a bit of both there. So it's a question of timing, but I like the idea of training camps, because I know when I go to a training camp, it's like a switch for me. It's like, righto, it's game on, it's training camp, and then I'd make sure, even if I left the training camp early, just to come home and get some of that racing and use some of the tactics that Kev said, like use some of those things to spark myself up for the race. I think that would be a pretty good option.
Magic. There we go. There you go, Nigel, to pick the bones out of that one. Well, I think that rounds off today's podcast. Greg, Kev, good to chat guys, and catch you soon.
Righto, mate. Thanks very much. And we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
All right, thanks guys, and look forward to the next podcast.